The drone feed flickered. Static ate the edges of the thermal image, but the center held steady. A town square, 200 bodies packed tight, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Lieutenant Evelyn Harper's fingers froze on the control stick. She'd seen detainee camps before. This wasn't one. The enemy fighters weren't building holding pens. They were forming firing lines. "Eve!" Sam Crowley's voice crackled through her headset, low and careful. The kind of careful that came from 30 years of knowing when to speak and when to shut up. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" "Execution formation," she whispered. "Kids in that group, Sam. Women. 6 hours, that's what the intercepted comms had said. 6 hours until the operation commenced." Eve's hand moved toward the report button, then stopped. Sam's breath was audible in her ear. "If you send that up the chain," he said quietly, "Command's going to tell us to stand down. They always do." The ISR Operations Center smelled like burned coffee and electrical ozone. Eve sat in her booth, the glow from 4 monitors turning her face blue-white in the darkness. Outside, the desert night pressed against the prefab walls of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, but in here she lived in pixels and data streams. Her MQ-9 Reaper circled 8,000 feet above a valley the locals called Almirha. On paper, this was routine surveillance, pattern of life analysis. Monitor the roads, count the vehicles, watch for weapons caches. Standard ISR work for a signals intelligence officer who'd spent 4 years learning how to turn electronic noise into actionable intelligence. "Reaper 6-1, you're steady on station." The voice belonged to Captain Morris, shift commander, calling from the glass booth overlooking the drone operations floor. "Anything interesting?" "Negative, sir. Traffic's light. 3 civilian vehicles in the past 2 hours, all heading north toward the refugee corridor." "Copy that. Keep eyes on the western approach. Intel thinks they might be moving supplies through there after dark." Eve adjusted the camera gimbal, sweeping the infrared feed across the valley floor. Dust, rocks, the skeletal remains of a burnt-out technical truck from some firefight years ago. The war had moved through this place like a storm and left wreckage in its wake. Her secondary monitor blinked. Signal intercept, radio chatter on a known enemy frequency. She pulled it up, ran it through the decryption filter. Garbled. Probably nothing. She flagged it anyway, added it to the queue for the linguists. "How's the coffee?" Sam Crowley's voice came from behind her, quiet enough not to startle, but close enough to hear. Eve didn't turn around. "Tastes like diesel." "That's how you know it's working." Sam settled into the observer chair beside her station. Officially, he was a contractor, a retired Special Forces operator brought back as a tactical advisor. Unofficially, he was the guy who'd forgotten more about combat than most officers would ever learn. At 62, he moved like a man who'd earned every scar and wasn't interested in collecting more. "You don't have duty tonight," Eve said. "Neither do you, technically. Your shift ended an hour ago." She glanced at the timestamp. 0200 hours. He was right. "Wanted to finish the orbit. Morris asked me to check the western route." Sam leaned back, arms crossed. "You ever notice how they always find one more thing for you to check?" "It's the job." "It's a job, not the only one you've got." He nodded toward the screen. "You spend 16 hours a day staring at that thing. You start seeing the world through a soda straw. Everything else disappears." Eve didn't answer. The Reaper banked left, camera tracking along a ridgeline. Empty. Always empty. Sometimes she wondered if the enemy had figured out the patrol patterns, learned when to move and when to hide. "You ever think about what happens after?" Sam asked. "After what?" "After this deployment, after the Army, after you've spent 10 years watching people through a camera and never actually meeting them." "I meet people." "You meet officers and analysts. That's not the same thing." Sam stood, stretched his back. Something popped. "Get some sleep, Lieutenant. The war'll still be here tomorrow. He left before she could respond. The operations center settled back into its familiar hum, cooling fans, radio static, the distant clack of someone typing. Eve watched the monitor. The Reaper's camera swept across Almirha, pixel by pixel, searching for threats that may or may not exist. She didn't know it yet, but in 4 hours that camera would show her something Command would wish she'd never seen. Eve's quarters were a shipping container with a cot, a locker, and a fan that rattled like a dying helicopter. She lay in the dark, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling, and tried to sleep. It didn't work. Her mind kept running through the intercept logs, the traffic patterns, the gaps in the intelligence picture. She'd been at FOB Sentinel for 7 months. Before that, Fort Huachuca for training, and before that, a childhood in Colorado where the biggest threat was black ice on I-25. The Army had sold her on signals intelligence with promises of high-tech espionage and strategic importance. What they hadn't mentioned was the tedium, the endless hours of watching nothing happen, waiting for something that might never come. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "Mom's asking when you're coming home. I told her you're saving the world one spreadsheet at a time." Eve smiled in the dark. Sarah didn't understand the work, not really, but she tried. That was enough. She typed back, "Tell her 3 more months, and it's not spreadsheets. It's very important pixel watching." The fan rattled. Somewhere outside, a generator coughed and died, then kicked back to life. Eve closed her eyes and thought about home, about mountains that didn't hide enemy fighters, about coffee that didn't taste like diesel, about a life where the most important decision was whether to hit snooze or get up for a run. She was almost asleep when her phone rang. "Harper, it's Morris. Get to ops, we've got something." Eve sat up, already reaching for her boots. "What kind of something?" "The kind you need to see. Move." The line went dead. Eve dressed in the dark, muscle memory guiding her hands, uniform, boots, ID card, sidearm. She was out the door in 90 seconds, jogging across the gravel yard toward the operations center. The night air was cold, sharp enough to cut through the fatigue. Inside, the ops floor was lit up like a crisis. Every station manned, every screen active. Captain Morris stood at the central console, arms braced on the desk, staring at the main display. He looked up when Eve entered. "Lieutenant, your Reaper picked up something 2 hours ago. Signal intercept, encrypted enemy comms. Linguistics just cracked it." Eve moved to her station. The decrypted transcript was already on her screen, Arabic text with English translation running parallel. "Command, status on the settlement operation. Unit 7, civilians secured in Central Square. Count, 247 including dependents. Command, timeline? Unit 7, ready to execute at 0800 local, awaiting final authorization. Command, authorization granted. Ensure no witnesses. Clean site." Eve read it twice, then a third time. Her stomach went cold. "Settlement operation," Morris said quietly. "That's what they're calling it. Sir, this is a massacre." Sam Crowley stepped out of the shadows near the back wall. Eve hadn't seen him come in. "They rounded up everyone in Almirha. They're going to kill them all and blame it on us." Morris shot him a look. "We don't know that for certain." "We know enough." Sam moved to the screen, tapped the timestamp. 0800 local. That's 6 hours from now. If this is real, we've got a window. "To do what?" Morris asked. "We're 15 clicks from Almirha with no ground assets in range. Even if I wanted to scramble a response, I'd need authorization from Brigade. That takes time." "Then get authorization." "On what basis? A single intercept? They'll want confirmation, corroboration, imagery. So get imagery." Sam turned to Eve. "Your Reaper's still on station?" "Yes, but put it over Almirha right now." Eve looked at Morris. The captain hesitated, then nodded. Do it. Her hands moved across the controls. The Reaper banked hard, engines whining as it came around on a new heading. The camera feed jittered, then stabilized. Darkness. Infrared outlines of buildings. The valley resolved on her screen and then, Jesus, Morris whispered. The town square was packed with people. Thermal signatures clustered tight, too many to count individually. White, hot shapes that could only be human bodies, packed shoulder to shoulder in the center of the plaza. Around the perimeter, vehicles, technicals with heavy weapons, troop trucks, fighters moving in formation. Eve zoomed in. The resolution sharpened. She could see hands behind backs, restraints, the heat signatures of children pressed against their mothers. They're zip-tied, she said, voice flat. All of them. Sam leaned over her shoulder. What's that? He pointed to the eastern edge of the square. Eve adjusted the camera. A section of ground had been disturbed. Dark earth turned over in a long, shallow trench. Graves, Sam said. They dug the graves first. Morris grabbed the phone. Get me brigade, now. The call took 17 minutes. Eve watched the clock, watched the screen, watched the thermal signatures shift and move in the square below. A child, had to be a child, the signature was too small, broke away from the group. A fighter grabbed them, dragged them back. The child's heat signature flared brighter. Crying, probably, screaming. Morris paced behind her, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with controlled urgency. Sir, I understand the protocol, but we have actionable intelligence indicating imminent mass casualty event. He listened. Eve couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could read Morris's expression well enough. Yes, sir, I understand. Single source intel requires corroboration, but the imagery... A pause. No, sir, no ground confirmation, but... Another pause, longer this time. Understood. I'll wait for guidance. He hung up. The operations center went quiet except for the hum of electronics and the whisper of the climate control. What'd they say? Sam asked. Morris set the phone down carefully, like it might break. Brigade wants confirmation from a second source before authorizing any action. They're concerned the intercept might be disinformation, and the imagery could be misinterpreted as a refugee processing point. Refugee processing, Sam's voice was flat, with mass graves. Their words, not mine. When do we get authorization? They'll review the intelligence and get back to us. When? Morris met his eyes. They didn't give me a timeline. Sam turned to Eve. How long until 0800 local? She checked the mission clock. 5 hours, 42 minutes. And how long does it take Brigade to review intelligence and make a decision? No one answered. They all knew. In a perfect world, with clear evidence and no political complications, maybe 2 hours. In the real world, with chains of command and risk assessments and lawyers checking every word, days, weeks sometimes. Sam walked to the main screen. The thermal image of Al-Mirha glowed in the darkness. 247 lives reduced to white pixels on a black background. I've seen this before, he said quietly. Different country, different war, same result. Morris turned. What are you talking about? Rwanda. I was there with a training team in '94. We had intel about the militias, about the kill lists. We sent it up the chain. They told us to wait for confirmation. Sam's jaw tightened. By the time confirmation came, 800,000 people were dead. This isn't Rwanda. No, it's faster. They're not using machetes. Sam tapped the screen where the graves were visible. They're efficient, professional. They'll be done by lunchtime. Eve stared at the monitor. Somewhere in that crowd of thermal signatures was a mother holding a child. Somewhere in there was a man who'd probably never held a weapon, who'd probably spent his whole life just trying to survive in a country that had been at war since before he was born. What do we do? She asked. Morris looked at her. For a moment, she saw something in his expression. Frustration, maybe, or anger at the machine he was part of. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask of professional composure. We follow the chain of command. We wait for orders. And if the orders don't come in time? He didn't answer. An hour passed, then another. Eve stayed at her station, keeping the Reaper on orbit, watching the square. The sun was starting to rise on the other side of the world. Thermal imagery gave way to visible light, and she could see them now. Not just heat signatures, but people. Real people. A woman in a blue headscarf. A man with a limp, favoring his right leg. Children sitting in the dust because there was nowhere else to sit. Lieutenant Morris appeared beside her station. Brigade wants an update on enemy force disposition. How many fighters do you count? Eve toggled through the camera feeds. Approximately 30 combatants, small arms visible, 2 heavy machine guns mounted on technicals. They're positioned around the perimeter in a defensive posture. Any reinforcements moving in? Negative. The valley's quiet except for Al-Mirha. Morris made a note on his tablet. Keep monitoring. If you see any change in their posture, alert me immediately. Sir, Eve hesitated. What did Brigade say about the timeline? They're still reviewing. It's been 2 hours. I'm aware, Lieutenant. We have less than 4 hours until... I know. Morris cut her off, not unkindly. I know what time it is, but my hands are tied until I get authorization. You understand that, right? I can't just launch a strike on my own authority. Eve understood. She understood that war was fought with rules, that even in chaos there was protocol, that the chain of command existed for a reason. She also understood that in 4 hours, those rules would mean nothing to the people in that square. Sam appeared on her other side. Captain, can I borrow your lieutenant for a minute? Morris frowned. We're in the middle of... I know, this won't take long. Morris looked between them, then nodded. 5 minutes. Sam jerked his head toward the exit. Eve followed him out into the hallway, away from the screens and the watching eyes of the operations floor. What is it? She asked. Sam leaned against the wall, arms crossed. In the fluorescent light, he looked older than 62. Tired, worn down by decades of seeing things he couldn't unsee. You need to decide something, he said, right now before this goes any further. Decide what? Whether you're going to be a good soldier or a good person. Because in about 3 hours, you're not going to be able to be both. Eve stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Brigade isn't going to authorize anything. They're going to sit on this intel until it's too late, and then they're going to express deep regret and promise a full investigation. I've seen it happen. I've been part of it happening. You don't know that. Yes, I do, and so do you. Sam pushed off the wall, stepped closer. Here's what you need to understand, Lieutenant. There are rules and there are people. Sometimes the rules protect people. Sometimes they don't. When that happens, you have to choose. I'm not going to break the chain of command. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. He glanced back toward the operations center. I'm asking you to think about what you're willing to live with. Because when this is over, when those people are dead and buried in that trench, you're going to have to sleep at night. You're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror. And no amount of following orders is going to change what you knew and what you didn't do about it. Eve's hands were shaking. She balled them into fists. What do you want me to do? I want you to keep watching that screen. I want you to document everything, and I want you to be ready. Ready for what? Sam smiled, but there was no humor in it. To make the hardest choice you've ever made. He walked away before she could respond. Eve stood in the hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt the weight of what was coming settle onto her shoulders like a pack full of stones. She went back to her station. The Reaper circled. The sun climbed higher. And in the town square of Al-Mirha, 247 people waited to die. 0530 hours. 2.5 hours until execution. Eve had been staring at the screen for so long that her eyes burned. She'd switched between thermal and visible light feeds a dozen times, zoomed in and out, tracked every fighter, every vehicle, every potential avenue of approach. She documented it all in her log: enemy positions, civilian count, terrain features. A perfect intelligence report that no one would read in time. Her phone buzzed. A message from Morris. Brigade requesting additional imagery of weapons disposition. Need clear shots of heavy weapons. She typed back, "Copy. Adjusting camera now." The Reaper banked. She brought the camera around, focused on the technical truck with the mounted PKM machine gun. Clear shot. Zoomed in further, she could see the ammo belt, the spare barrels stacked in the truck bed. She took the screenshot, uploaded it to the shared drive. Another message. Good. They want confirmation that these are hostile forces, not local security. Eve stared at the text. Local security, as if there was any question. As if the mass grave wasn't confirmation enough. She typed, hostile confirmed. Personnel match known enemy force profiles. No insignia consistent with local security. The reply came back fast. Brigade wants to know if there's any possibility of misidentification. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about what Sam had said, about rules and people, about what she was willing to live with. She typed, no possibility of misidentification. These are enemy combatants preparing to execute civilians. Recommend immediate action. She hit send before she could second guess it. That last sentence, recommend immediate action, was outside her lane. She was ISR, not operations. She provided intelligence. Someone else made the decisions. But someone else wasn't making decisions fast enough. Morris appeared at her station 2 minutes later. Lieutenant, did you add an operational recommendation to your intelligence report? Yes, sir. That's not your job. I know, sir. He studied her face. Brigade kicked it back. They want pure intelligence assessment, no operational commentary. Sir, with respect, they have pure intelligence assessment. They have imagery, intercepts, terrain analysis. What they don't have is time. That's not our call. Then whose call is it? The words came out sharper than she intended. Sir, we have 2 hours. If they wait much longer, I'm aware of the timeline. Morris's voice was hard. But I need you to stay in your lane. Provide the intelligence. Let the chain of command do its job. And if the chain of command fails? Morris didn't answer. He walked away, and Eve was left staring at the screen again. The woman in the blue headscarf was still visible. She was holding a child now, the small shape pressed against her chest. Protecting them, as if there was any protection left in the world. 0630 hours, 90 minutes. The operations center had filled up. Officers she didn't recognize, probably from Brigade, standing in clusters around the main display. Everyone watching, everyone waiting, no one acting. Sam stood in the back corner, arms crossed, face expressionless. He caught her eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. She understood. Nothing was coming. No authorization, no strike, no rescue. Just process and procedure and the slow grinding of bureaucracy while the clock ran out. Eve pulled up the intercept logs again. The original message, the one that had started this, authorization granted, ensure no witnesses, clean site, sanitize the evidence, kill everyone and deny it ever happened. She switched to the live feed. The fighters were moving now, shifting positions. One of them, she couldn't tell rank from this distance, was walking among the civilians, pointing, separating people into groups. Women and children on the left, men on the right. They're organizing them, she said aloud. Morris came over. What? The fighters. They're separating the civilians into groups. She highlighted the activity on screen. That's execution protocol. Separate by demographics. Process in batches. You're sure? I've seen the training materials. ISIS used this exact method in Mosul. Her voice was steady, clinical. She was reporting facts. That's all she could do. Report facts and watch people die. Morris grabbed his phone. "Get me Brigade Actual, right now." But Eve knew it wouldn't matter. She could see the sun climbing in the sky over Al-Mirha. She could see the fighters checking their weapons, chambering rounds. She could see the woman in the blue headscarf being pushed toward the left group, the child still in her arms. 90 minutes, probably less. Sam materialized beside her. "How much fuel does your Reaper have?" Eve checked the telemetry. 4 hours. Why? "Because in about 60 minutes you're going to need to make a choice." He kept his voice low, barely audible over the radio chatter and keyboard clicks. "And I need to know if you're going to have the fuel to make it." "Make what choice?" "The one where you decide whether that drone is a camera or a weapon." Eve's breath caught. The MQ-9 Reaper carried more than cameras. It carried Hellfire missiles, 2 of them on this patrol, standard loadout. She'd never fired them, never even run through the targeting sequence outside of training. "That's not," she started. "Not your job, I know. But in 60 minutes, it might be the only job that matters." "Sam, I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to decide now. I'm asking you to be ready if the decision comes." He glanced at the screen. "Because those people don't have 60 minutes of committee meetings left. They have 60 minutes of life." He walked away. Eve sat frozen, staring at the weapons panel on her control interface. The Hellfire missiles showed as green, armed, ready, waiting for target designation. She joined the army to serve, to follow orders, to be part of something bigger than herself. But what did service mean when the orders never came? What did duty mean when doing your job meant watching murder happen in real time? Her hands moved without conscious thought, pulling up the targeting interface. Just to look, just to see what it would take. Target acquisition, laser designation or GPS coordinates. Safety protocols, commander authorization required. Time to impact, approximately 45 seconds from launch. It would be so easy. Point, click, fire. 45 seconds and those fighters would be dead. The civilians would scatter. The massacre would be stopped. And she would spend the rest of her life in Leavenworth. Eve closed the targeting interface. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She would wait for orders. She just hoped the orders would come before she ran out of people to save. 0715 hours, 45 minutes. "All stations, this is Brigade Actual." The voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Command authority." Everyone in the operations center stopped talking. "We have reviewed the intelligence from FOB Sentinel regarding potential hostile activity in Al-Mirha. After consultation with higher command and legal counsel, we have determined that the current evidence does not meet the threshold for kinetic action under the rules of engagement." Eve felt her stomach drop. The voice continued. "The imagery shows detained civilians, which is concerning, but does not definitively indicate imminent unlawful killing. The intercepted communications, while suggestive, lack sufficient context for positive identification of intent. Therefore, we are directing FOB Sentinel to maintain surveillance and report any changes in hostile disposition. No strike authorization is granted at this time." Static. Silence. Then, "We understand this is a difficult situation. Continue monitoring. Brigade Actual out." The speaker clicked off. The operations center erupted, voices raised, arguments breaking out between the officers from Brigade and the analysts who'd been watching the screen for 6 hours. Morris stood at the center console, hands flat on the desk, head down. Sam walked through the chaos like a ghost. He stopped at Eve's station, leaned down close to her ear. "That's it then. They made their choice." He straightened. "Now you have to make yours." Eve couldn't speak. She stared at the screen. The fighters in Al-Mirha had finished separating the civilians. The men were lined up on one side of the square, the women and children on the other. The graves were visible in the morning light, Long, dark trenches waiting to be filled. 45 minutes. Her hand moved to the targeting interface, hovered there. Every regulation she'd ever learned, every rule she'd memorized, every oath she'd sworn, they all said the same thing. Wait for orders. Trust the chain of command. Don't act alone. But the chain of command had just condemned 247 people to death. Lieutenant Harper, Morris's voice sharp, I need you to acknowledge the brigade directive. She turned to face him. Sir, acknowledge that you received and understood the order to maintain surveillance only. No strike authorization. I understand, sir. Say it clearly, for the record. Eve looked at him, really looked, and she saw it in his eyes, the same conflict, the same rage at the machine they were part of. He was asking her to acknowledge the order because he knew what she was thinking. He knew, and he was trying to protect her from herself. Lieutenant Harper acknowledges brigade directive, she said, voice steady. Surveillance only. No strike authorization granted. Morris nodded. Good, he walked away. Sam was still standing there. You have 43 minutes, he said quietly. After that, it won't matter what you decide. Eve pulled up the weapons panel. The Hellfire missiles glowed green on her screen. Armed, ready, waiting. She thought about her sister Sarah, about home, about the life she'd imagined when she joined the army. She thought about courts-martial and prison and the end of everything she'd worked for. Then she thought about the woman in the blue headscarf holding a child, waiting to die. She opened the targeting interface, and in that moment, Lieutenant Evelyn Harper stopped being a good soldier and started trying to be a good person. The question was whether she'd live long enough to find out which one mattered more. Eve's fingers moved across the targeting interface like she was defusing a bomb. Every input had to be precise. One mistake and the Hellfire would miss, or worse, hit the civilians instead of the fighters. She zoomed the camera to maximum resolution. The square filled her screen. She could count individual people now, see the zip ties cutting into wrists, see the way mothers position themselves between the guns and their children. The targeting reticle appeared, a small green crosshair that followed her mouse movement. She positioned it over the technical truck with a mounted machine gun. Eastern edge of the square. If she took that out first, it would eliminate their heaviest weapon and create chaos. Her hand moved to the launch authorization button. Stopped. The protocol screen was still red. Commander authorization required. She could override it. The system let her. There was a manual bypass for emergencies, situations where communications were down and immediate action was necessary. But using it would create a digital record, a timestamp showing exactly when Lieutenant Evelyn Harper decided to disobey a direct order from brigade. What are you doing? Sam's voice quiet right behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. Targeting sequence, she said. I need to be ready. Ready for what? You got authorization I don't know about? No. Then what's the plan? Eve didn't look away from the screen. The plan is I stop them. By yourself? With no support, no cover story, no backup? Sam leaned closer. You fire that missile, your career is over. You know that, right? I know. Courts-martial, dishonorable discharge, maybe prison, depending on how bad they want to make an example. I know. Sam was quiet for a moment. On the screen, one of the fighters raised a radio to his mouth. Coordinating, getting ready. Okay, Sam said finally. Then we do it together. Eve turned to look at him. What? You heard me. You're not doing this alone. He pulled up a chair, sat down beside her station. You handle the targeting. I'll handle the fallout. Sam, you can't. I'm a contractor. I don't have a career to lose. Just a retirement I was getting bored with anyway. He gestured at the screen. Besides, you'll need someone who's actually fired a Hellfire before. That training simulator you used, not the same as the real thing. You're serious. Dead serious. But we need to do this smart. One missile isn't enough. You've got 30 fighters down there, spread out. You hit one target, the rest scatter and execute the civilians out of panic. We need a real plan. Eve looked at the weapons panel. 2 Hellfires. That was it. What if we had more? She asked. More what? More assets, not just our Reaper. What if we could make them think they were under attack from multiple directions? Sam's eyes narrowed. You want to fake an airstrike? No, I want to fake a threat big enough that they run instead of fight. She pulled up the communications panel. We have radio access to their frequencies, right? From the intercepts? Yeah, but what if we broadcast a warning? Make them think F-16s are inbound, that they have 60 seconds to evacuate before they get flattened. They'll check with their command. They'll know it's fake. Not if their command radio gets jammed at the same time. Eve's mind was racing now, pieces falling into place. We hit the technical with 1 Hellfire, that's their heavy weapon and probably their command vehicle. Simultaneously jam their comms, then broadcast the warning on their tactical frequency. They'll panic, they'll run. And the second Hellfire? Insurance. If they don't run, if they start executing hostages out of spite, we drop it on the largest concentration of fighters. Sam studied her face. You've been thinking about this. For the last 20 minutes. She pulled up the frequency database. Can you jam their command net? I can try. But Eve, you understand what you're proposing. This isn't just firing a missile. This is psychological warfare, communications jamming, unauthorized combat action. I understand. They'll know it was us. There's only 1 Reaper over Almira. They'll trace it back to this station in about 5 minutes. I know. Sam leaned back, ran a hand over his face. Christ, okay. Okay, let's say we do this. What's the timeline? Eve checked the mission clock. 38 minutes until their scheduled execution time. We move earlier, catch them off guard. How much earlier? 10 minutes. That puts us at, Sam checked his watch, 07:25, 15 minutes from now. That's not much time to prep. It's enough. Sam stood, looked around the operations center. Most of the officers were still arguing near the main display, backs turned. I'll handle the jamming from the electronics warfare station. You set up your targeting. When I give you the signal, you fire. What signal? I'll say execute. That's when you launch. He paused. You sure about this, Lieutenant? Last chance to back out. Eve looked at the screen. The woman in the blue headscarf was visible, kneeling now, the child pressed against her chest. In 15 minutes, if Eve did nothing, that woman would be dead. The child would be dead. 245 others would be dead. I'm sure, she said. Sam nodded. Then let's go to war. The next 12 minutes were the longest of Eve's life. Sam moved to the electronic warfare station 2 rows over, logging in with his contractor credentials. To anyone watching, he was just checking something, running a routine diagnostic. Eve kept her eyes on her screen, hands moving through the targeting sequence with practiced efficiency. First Hellfire, GPS coordinates locked on the technical truck. She could see the fighter standing beside it, smoking a cigarette, rifle slung over his shoulder. He had no idea that 8,000 feet above him, a missile was waiting with his name on it. Second Hellfire, area target, center mass of the square where the largest group of fighters was positioned. She didn't lock it yet. That would come last, only if needed. She pulled up the enemy radio frequency, the one they'd been monitoring all night, set up a pre-recorded message in Arabic using the captured voice samples from earlier intercepts. The message was simple: American airstrike inbound. Evacuate immediately. You have 60 seconds. Her hands were shaking. She balled them into fists, took a breath, steadied them. Harper, Morris's voice, sharp. He was walking toward her station. Eve's finger hovered over the minimize button, ready to hide the targeting interface. But Morris wasn't looking at her screen. He was looking at her face. Sir, Are you all right? You look pale. Just tired, sir. Long shift. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. Take a break after this rotation. Get some food. You've been on station for 8 hours. Yes, sir. He walked away. Eve exhaled slowly. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The mission clock ticked down. 07:23. 2 minutes. Sam's voice crackled through her headset, private channel. EW station is ready. Jamming package prepared. On your mark. Copy, she whispered. She pulled up the Hellfire launch sequence. Safety interlocks disengaged. Manual override enabled. Target confirmed. The missile was hot, ready to fly. All it needed was her finger on the trigger. 724. On the screen, the fighters were moving. One of them walked to the group of men, grabbed someone, dragged them toward the trench. A test run, maybe, or just cruelty. 07:24:30. Eve positioned her cursor over the launch button. One click. That's all it would take. One click and she'd cross a line she could never uncross. She thought about her oath. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. She thought about the rules of engagement, the chain of command, the laws of war. Then she thought about the woman in the blue headscarf. 07:25:00. Execute, Sam said quietly. Eve clicked. The Hellfire missile dropped from the Reaper's wing and fell for 2 seconds in silence before its rocket motor ignited. Eve watched the telemetry, a small dot on her screen, descending at terminal velocity, GPS guidance active, laser designator locked. Time to impact, 43 seconds. She switched the camera to wide angle, trying to keep both the missile track and the target in frame. The technical truck sat at the edge of the square, the fighter beside it still smoking his cigarette. He didn't look up. Why would he? You couldn't hear a Hellfire coming. By the time you saw it, you were already dead. 30 seconds. Eve's hand moved to the communications panel. She activated the broadcast on the enemy frequency, hit play. The recorded message went out, Arabic words crackling across the valley. American airstrike inbound. Evacuate immediately. You have 60 seconds. 20 seconds. The fighters in the square froze. One of them grabbed a radio, started shouting into it. Nothing came back. Sam had activated the jamming. Their command net was dead, filled with white noise. 10 seconds. The fighter by the truck looked up, saw something, maybe a glint of sunlight off the missile's nose, maybe just instinct. He dropped the cigarette, started to run. 5 seconds. Impact. The Hellfire hit the truck's engine block and detonated. Eve had seen explosions on screen before, training footage and combat video, but never one she'd caused. The fireball bloomed white-hot on her thermal camera, the shockwave radiating out in a perfect circle. The truck disintegrated. The fighter who'd been standing beside it simply ceased to exist, erased in an instant of fire and pressure. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off, fuel tanks rupturing, black smoke poured into the sky. Target destroyed, Eve said, voice mechanical. Standing by for battle damage assessment. Sam's voice in her ear. EW package is active. Their comms are down. Watch for reaction. Eve zoomed the camera back out. The square was chaos. Fighters running in every direction, shouting, pointing at the burning wreckage. Some grabbed weapons, scanning the sky for aircraft that weren't there. Others just ran, training forgotten, pure survival instinct taking over. The civilians didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were, hands zip-tied, watching their captors panic. They're not evacuating the civilians, Eve said. They're leaving them. Good. That's what we want. Watch the... A fighter grabbed one of the men from the civilian group, put a gun to his head. Eve's breath stopped. He's going to execute, she said. Sam, he's going to... I see it. Do you have a shot? She brought the targeting reticle up, centered it on the fighter. But he was too close to the civilian, maybe 2 feet of separation. A hellfire would kill them both. Negative, too close. If I fire, the fighter shouted something, waving his gun at the sky, threatening, making a point, but he didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he threw the civilian back into the group and ran toward the nearest vehicle. "They're bugging out," Sam said. "It's working." Eve watched the screen. The fighters were piling into trucks, engines starting, wheels kicking up dust. Within 90 seconds, half of them were gone, vehicles racing out of the square toward the northern road. The others followed, abandoning weapons, abandoning positions, abandoning the civilians they'd been about to murder. 2 minutes after the first hellfire hit, Al-Mirha Square was empty, except for 247 people, with zip-tied hands and no idea what had just happened. Eve slumped in her chair. Her hands were still shaking. The targeting reticle was still active on her screen, the second hellfire still loaded and ready. "You did it," Sam said quietly. "They're alive." But Eve wasn't listening. She was staring at the communications panel, at the red light that had just started blinking. Incoming call, priority channel, brigade actual. "Sam," she said, "we have a problem." The call connected before Eve could decide whether to answer. Captain Morris's face appeared on her secondary monitor, and behind him she could see other officers, colonels, maybe a general, command staff. "Lieutenant Harper," Morris's voice was cold. "Did you just launch a Hellfire missile at Al-Mirha?" There was no point lying. The system had logged everything: time of launch, authorization bypass, target coordinates. The digital trail was already complete. "Yes, sir." "On whose authority?" "My own, sir." Silence on the line. Morris's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went hard. "Stand by," he said, and muted the call. Eve sat frozen, watching the officers on the screen confer. Lips moving, hands gesturing, but no sound. Sam appeared at her station. "They're deciding what to do with you," he said. "Probably whether to arrest you now or wait until the shift ends." "It doesn't matter." Eve's voice was hollow. "They're safe, the civilians. That's all that matters." "It'll matter when you're sitting in a cell at Leavenworth." "Then I'll sit in a cell." She looked at him. "I'd do it again, Sam. Right now if I had to. I'd do it again." Before he could respond, Morris unmuted the call. "Lieutenant, I need you to lock your station and step away from the controls. Immediately." "Sir, the Reaper still has..." "Lock your station." Each word separate, precise, an order with no room for interpretation. Eve's hands moved to the keyboard. She was entering the lockdown sequence when the enemy frequency crackled to life. Not her broadcast, but actual traffic. Live comms. She paused, listening. Arabic, fast, urgent. She caught maybe one word in 3, but the tone was clear. Panic. "Sir, I'm picking up enemy comms." "I said, lock your station, Lieutenant." "Sir, they're talking about..." She pulled up the translation overlay, watched the text scroll across her screen. Her blood went cold. Oh, God. "Harper, what is it?" Eve's mind raced. She'd stopped the execution. She'd saved the civilians. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd assumed the fighters would keep running. She'd assumed they'd stay gone. They weren't staying gone. "Sir, enemy forces are regrouping. They're coming back." She pulled up the wide area surveillance. "I count 4 vehicles, approximately 15 to 20 combatants. They're heading back to Al-Mirha from the north." Morris leaned closer to his camera. "Why would they come back?" "Because we made them think it was an airstrike. They ran, they got outside the blast radius, and now they've realized there's no follow-up attack. No jets overhead. Just one explosion and then silence." Eve's voice was rising. "Sir, they're coming back to finish what they started." "How long until they reach the square?" Eve checked the map overlay. 12 minutes, maybe less." The line went silent. Eve could see Morris turn to someone off camera, see him arguing. She couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. A decision being made. Fast. Morris came back on screen. Lieutenant, maintain your station. Do not lock down. I need continuous surveillance on those vehicles. Yes, sir. And Harper, if you launch another missile without my direct order, I will personally ensure you spend the next 20 years in a cell. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. The call ended. Eve exhaled and realized she'd been holding her breath. Sam was still standing there, arms crossed. 12 minutes, he said. What's the plan? I don't have a plan, Morris said. Morris is covering his ass while he waits for someone higher up to make a decision. You know how long that'll take? We don't have another option. I can't fire again without authorization. You fired once without authorization. And look how well that turned out. Eve gestured at the locked communications panel. They're going to court-martial me, Sam. The only question is whether it happens before or after those people die. Sam pulled up a chair, sat down hard. Then we need to buy time. How? Same way we did last time. Make them think the threat is bigger than it is. He pointed at the map. Those vehicles are taking the northern road. What else is on that road? Eve zoomed out. Nothing. It's a straight shot from their rally point to Almirha. No cover, no obstacles. No obstacles, Sam repeated, which means they're exposed, vulnerable. To what? We only have one Hellfire left. They don't know that. Sam's eyes were bright, the look of a man working through a problem he'd solved 100 times before. We made them run with one missile and a fake radio call. What if we make them think there's more coming? What if we convince them the whole valley is about to get lit up? Eve shook her head. They'll have figured out the radio trick by now. Their command will have told them it was fake. So we don't use radio. We use something they can't ignore. He pointed at the Reaper's camera feed. How low can you fly that thing? It's not a manned aircraft, Sam. It doesn't do strafing runs. I'm not asking you to strafe. I'm asking how low you can go before they can see it. Eve checked the flight parameters. We're at 8,000 feet now, optimal for surveillance. If I drop below 2,000, they'll be able to hear the engine. Below 1,000, they'll definitely see it. Perfect. Drop to 1,000 feet. Put the Reaper directly over that convoy. That'll spook them, but it won't stop them. It will if they think you're about to fire. Sam stood, started pacing. You drop low, you hold position right above them. They'll hear it, they'll see it, and they'll know that anything at that altitude can drop ordnance. They'll scatter. For maybe 2 minutes. Then they'll regroup and keep coming. 2 minutes is 2 minutes. And while they're scattered, you hit the lead vehicle with your last Hellfire. Take out whoever's in charge. Make it personal. Eve stared at the screen. The convoy was 9 minutes out from Almirha. 9 minutes until 247 people were back in the same nightmare they'd barely escaped. This is insane, she said. Completely, Sam agreed. But you got a better idea? She didn't. God help her, she didn't. Eve grabbed the flight controls and started the descent. The Reaper dropped like a stone. 8,000 feet to 6,000 to 4,000, the altimeter unwinding fast. Eve's eyes flicked between the flight instruments and the camera feed, watching the ground rush up to meet her. Below, the convoy was a line of 4 vehicles kicking up dust on the desert road. Technical trucks, probably the same ones that had fled earlier. She could see fighters in the truck beds, weapons bristling. 3,000 feet. The Reaper's engine note changed as she reduced throttle. Normally, the drone was nearly silent from the ground, but at low altitude with the engine working hard, it would sound like a lawnmower in the sky. Loud, obvious, threatening. 2,000 feet. Harper, what the hell are you doing? Morris's voice on the command channel. You're out of operational altitude. Running an intercept, sir. Testing enemy reaction to air presence. I didn't authorize. Sir, with respect, we have 7 minutes before those fighters reach the civilians. If you have a better plan, I'm listening. Silence. Then, maintain current heading. Report any changes in enemy disposition. He hadn't said, stop. That was as close to authorization as she was going to get. 1,000 feet. The ground filled her camera, details she'd never see from 8,000 feet visible now. Individual rocks, tire tracks in the sand, and the convoy close enough that she could make out faces in the truck beds. They're reacting, Sam said. He'd pulled up a duplicate feed on his station. Lead vehicle is slowing. Eve watched the lead truck brake, dust billowing around its tires. The fighter in the passenger seat was pointing up, shouting something. The other vehicles slowed too, bunching up. Hold your position, Sam said. Let them sweat. The Reaper circled overhead, 800 feet above the convoy. Low enough that the sound of the engine was unmistakable. Low enough that anyone looking up would see it clearly. A Predator drone, armed and hostile, directly overhead. The lead truck stopped completely. Fighters jumped out, weapons raised, scanning the sky. One of them grabbed a radio. They're calling for air defense, Eve said, watching the intercept log. Requesting anti-air support. Good, that means they're scared. Sam leaned forward. How far out are they from Almirha? 5 kilometers, maybe 6 minutes at current speed. And if they keep running scared? Could buy us 10, 15 minutes. Not enough. We need to stop them permanently. Sam's voice was grim. You've got 1 shot left, Eve. Make it count. She pulled up the targeting interface for the second Hellfire. The lead vehicle was stationary now, fighters clustered around it. Perfect target. But something nagged at her. Sam, if I hit the lead vehicle, the others will scatter. They'll take different routes into Almirha. We can't stop all of them. So what do you want to do? Eve studied the map. The road the convoy was on was the only northern approach to Almirha, a narrow track between 2 rocky ridges. If she could block that road, force them to turn around or find another route. I'm not targeting the vehicles, she said. I'm targeting the road. What? The ridge line, eastern side. See that overhang? She highlighted it on the map. It's unstable, probably eroded from wind and rain. If I hit it with a Hellfire, it'll collapse, rock slide across the road. Sam zoomed in on the geological survey overlay. That's actually brilliant. How confident are you it'll work? 70%, maybe 80%. And if it doesn't? Then I've wasted our last missile, and those people die anyway. Sam was quiet for a long moment. It's your call, Lieutenant. Eve's hand hovered over the controls. Every instinct said to target the fighters directly. Guaranteed kill, guaranteed disruption. But temporary. They'd regroup, find another way. A rock slide would buy hours, maybe enough time for Brigade to pull their heads out and send actual support. She locked the targeting reticle on the ridgeline, adjusted for wind, for trajectory, for the angle of impact needed to destabilize the rock face. Targeting set, she said. Firing in 3, 2... Harper, hold! Morris's voice urgent. I've got Brigade on the line. They're authorizing a strike. Eve's finger froze on the trigger. Say again, sir? Brigade is authorizing kinetic action against the convoy. They want you to hit the lead vehicle. Maximum casualties. They're sending it through now. You should see the authorization code in 3, 2... The authorization panel on Eve's screen turned green. Official strike order. Legal. Sanctioned. Everything she'd wanted an hour ago. But the targeting reticle was still locked on the ridgeline. Sir, she said slowly, I have a different target selected. What? Why? The road, sir. If I can collapse the approach, we stop the convoy without engaging directly. Buys us time for follow-up action. Lieutenant, you have authorization to engage enemy combatants. Direct action, that's the order. Eve looked at the screen, at the fighters gathered around their trucks, weapons raised, searching the sky, at the ridgeline waiting to fall, at the timer counting down to 0. She thought about the woman in the blue headscarf, about doing the right thing, about what following orders had gotten them so far. Sir, with respect, I'm taking the shot I think will save the most lives. Harper, that's not... She fired. The hellfire left a contrail like a scratch across the sky. Eve watched it arc downward, the GPS guidance system counting down distance to impact. The fighters below saw it too. She watched them scatter, diving for cover, some running, some just frozen in place. But the missile wasn't aimed at them. It hit the ridgeline 30 meters above the road. The explosion was smaller than the first one, contained by the rock face. For a second, nothing happened. Eve's heart sank. Miscalculation. The rock was more stable than she'd thought. The shot had failed. Then the ridgeline groaned. She couldn't hear it, of course, not from 8,000 feet up, but she could see it on the camera feed. The overhang shifted. Cracks spiderwebbed across the rock face. And then gravity took over. The rock slide started slow, a few boulders tumbling loose, bouncing down the slope. Then faster as more rock came free. Then catastrophic as half the ridgeline collapsed in a thundering avalanche of stone and dust. The fighters scattered, trucks accelerating in reverse, trying to get clear. They almost made it. The lead vehicle backed up 50 meters before the rocks caught it, boulders the size of cars crushing the hood and cab. The truck disappeared under the cascade, swallowed whole. The other vehicles kept backing up, engines screaming, until they were clear of the slide zone. Then they stopped, idling in the dust cloud, and waited for the rocks to stop falling. When it was over, the road was gone, buried under 20 feet of rubble. Impassable. Target destroyed, Eve said, voice hollow. Road is blocked. Morris's voice came back, tight with barely controlled anger. Lieutenant, you were given a direct order to engage enemy combatants. I engaged the terrain, sir, achieved the mission objective of stopping the convoy. That's not... Morris cut himself off. Eve could hear voices in the background, arguing. Then he came back on. How long until they can clear that road? Eve scanned the rock slide. Tons of debris, unstable ground, no heavy equipment visible. Days, sir, maybe a week. They'd need excavators, maybe explosives. It's not happening today. More arguing in the background. Then a different voice came on, older, authoritative, someone from brigade. Lieutenant Harper, this is Colonel Pearson. What's the status of the civilians in Almira? Eve switched cameras, brought up the town square. The zip-tied crowd was still there, confused, scared, but alive. No fighters visible. The square was quiet. Civilians remain in place, sir. No immediate threat. Enemy forces are blocked north of the objective by rockslide. And the enemy combatants who fled south? Still moving away from objective. No indication of return. Outstanding. Pearson's voice carried something like relief. Maintain surveillance. We're scrambling a rescue element from Camp Stryker. ETA 90 minutes. Can you hold until then? Eve looked at her fuel gauge. Affirmative, sir. I have sufficient fuel for continued coverage. Good. Lieutenant, I want you to understand, what you did today was outside the chain of command. Way outside. But it was also, he paused, it was the right call. We'll sort out the details later. For now, keep those people safe. Yes, sir. The line went quiet. Eve sat back in her chair, hands still shaking, and stared at the screen. The woman in the blue headscarf was standing now, looking around, probably wondering why the fighters had fled and not come back. Sam appeared beside her station. You hear that? They're sending a rescue team. I heard. You saved them, Eve. 247 people are going home because of you. And how many people are going to court-martial me? Sam smiled. It was tired but genuine. Let them try. You've got the whole thing on video. Self-defense of civilian population. Proportional use of force. By the book Rules of Engagement. I fired without authorization. You fired after authorization was unreasonably delayed. Big difference. He squeezed her shoulder. You did good, Lieutenant. Don't let them take that away from you. Eve wanted to believe him. She wanted to think that doing the right thing would be enough. But she'd been in the army long enough to know that righteousness didn't always survive contact with reality. On her screen, the Reaper continued its orbit. The civilians remained huddled in the square. The rock slide blocked the road. And somewhere in a headquarters far from the battlefield, officers were already preparing the reports that would determine whether Lieutenant Evelyn Harper was a hero or a criminal. She didn't know which one she'd turn out to be, but at least she'd be able to sleep at night. The next hour passed in a strange calm. Eve maintained the Reaper's orbit, watching the square, waiting for the rescue element. The enemy fighters who'd fled south didn't return. The convoy trapped north of the rock slide eventually turned around and disappeared back the way they'd come. Morris came on the command channel every 15 minutes with updates. The rescue element was in transit. Air support was being scrambled as cover. A diplomatic team was coordinating with local authorities to ensure safe passage. Eve acknowledged each update and kept watching her screen. At 0847 hours, Sam brought her coffee. Real coffee, not the diesel sludge from the ops center machine. He must have gone to the officer's mess. "Thought you could use this," he said. Eve took it, wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Thanks. Rescue's 30 minutes out. Almost over." "Almost." Sam pulled up a chair. For a while they just sat there, watching the screen in silence. Then he said, "You know what happens next, right? Court-martial. Discharge. Maybe prison. Maybe, or maybe they pin a medal on you and pretend they were supporting you the whole time." He sipped his own coffee. "Either way, your life just changed. You can't unknow what you know now." "What do I know?" "That the chain of command can fail. That sometimes the rules get people killed. That being a good soldier and being a good person aren't always the same thing." He looked at her. "Most people go their whole career without learning that. You learned it in one night." Eve stared at her coffee. "I don't feel like I learned anything. I feel like I broke something I can't fix." "You broke the illusion. The idea that if you just follow orders, everything will work out." Sam's voice was gentle. "That illusion keeps a lot of soldiers sane, lets them sleep at night, but it's still an illusion." "So what do I do now?" "You live with it. You accept that the world is more complicated than the rulebook says, and you keep making hard choices, one at a time, until you figure out what kind of officer you want to be." Before Eve could respond, her screen flashed. Movement in Almirha. She zoomed in. Vehicles approaching from the west. Military trucks with American markings. The rescue element. "They're here," she said. Sam stood, moved closer to the screen. The trucks entered the square and soldiers poured out, weapons ready, setting a perimeter. Then the squad leader approached the civilians, and Eve watched as he pulled out a knife and started cutting zip ties. One by one, the people stood, rubbed their wrists, looked around like they couldn't believe they were still alive. The woman in the blue headscarf was one of the last to be freed. She stood slowly, the child still in her arms, and said something to the soldier who'd cut her restraints. The soldier nodded, pointed toward one of the trucks. She walked toward it, limping, exhausted, but alive. Eve felt something in her chest crack. Not break, just crack, enough to let some of the tension out. She'd done it. Against orders, against protocol, against every rule in the book, she'd done it. "Lieutenant Harper," Morris's voice on the command, "bring your Reaper home. Mission complete." Eve's hands moved across the controls. She brought the Reaper around on a heading back to base, increased altitude to cruise level, set the autopilot. The camera feed switched to forward view, leaving Almirha behind. "Reaper RTB," she said. "Flight time, 40 minutes. Copy that. When you land, I need you to report to the command building. Colonel Pearson wants to debrief." "Understood, sir." The line clicked off. Eve leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Sam's hand settled on her shoulder. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "you did the right thing." "I hope so. I know so. I've been doing this long enough to recognize the real thing when I see it." He squeezed her shoulder once, then let go. "Now finish your coffee. You're going to need it." The Reaper landed itself 43 minutes later. Eve watched on her monitor as the drone touched down on the runway, taxi speed reducing, coming to a stop on the hardstand where the ground crew was waiting. Mission complete. She logged out of her station, saved the flight data, and stood. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long. Her back ached. She felt like she'd aged 10 years in the last 8 hours. Morris was waiting for her at the operations center exit. His expression was unreadable. "Colonel Pearson's waiting in conference room B," he said. "I'll walk you over." They walked in silence across the compound. The sun was up now, bright and hot, turning the desert into a blast furnace. Soldiers moved between buildings, going about their duties, oblivious to the fact that 247 people were alive because one lieutenant had decided to break the rules. Morris stopped outside the command building. "For what it's worth," he said, "I would have made the same call if I'd had the guts. Sir, I watched those people for 6 hours. I sent the reports, made the requests, followed every protocol, and it didn't matter." He looked at her. "You did what I couldn't, what I wouldn't. I don't know if that makes you brave or stupid, but it makes you something." He walked away before she could respond. Eve entered the building. Conference room B was down the hall, door closed. She knocked. "Enter." Colonel Pearson sat at the head of the table. He was 50s, graying hair, the kind of officer who'd probably spent more time behind a desk than in the field. 2 other officers flanked him, a major she didn't recognize, and a captain with a JAG insignia on his uniform. "Lieutenant Harper," Pearson said, "sit down." Eve sat. Her hands were still shaking. She clasped them in her lap, hoping no one would notice. Pearson opened a folder. "I've reviewed the mission logs from FOB Sentinel. 2 Hellfire missiles fired, both without initial authorization. 1 direct strike on enemy vehicle, 1 strike on terrain feature. Civilian casualties, 0. Enemy casualties, estimated 4 killed in action, multiple wounded. Mission outcome, successful rescue of 247 civilians." He looked up. "In my 30 years of service, I've never seen a more clear-cut case of someone violating orders and being absolutely, unquestionably right." Eve blinked. "Sir?" "You saved those people, Lieutenant. There's no question about that. The question is what we do about the fact that you committed multiple violations of military law in the process." The JAG captain leaned forward. "Lieutenant, I need to inform you that you have the right to legal counsel. Anything you say in this room can be used in court-martial proceedings. Do you understand?" "I understand, sir." "Do you wish to have counsel present before we continue?" Eve thought about it. Thought about lawyers and trials and years of appeals. Thought about the woman in the blue headscarf, walking free. "No, sir. I'll answer your questions." Pearson nodded. "All right, let's start simple. Why did you fire the first Hellfire without authorization?" "Because people were about to die, sir, and the chain of command had failed to act." "You determined that the chain of command had failed?" "I determined that waiting for authorization would result in mass casualties. I chose to prevent those casualties." The major spoke up. "You understand that's not your call to make, Lieutenant. The rules of engagement exist for a reason." "I understand, sir, but the rules of engagement also allow for defense of civilian populations under imminent threat. That's exactly what I did." "After your own command told you to stand down, after my command failed to provide timely authorization for necessary action." "Yes, sir." Pearson held up a hand. "Let's talk about the second missile. You had authorization for that one. You were ordered to hit the convoy directly. Instead, you targeted the ridgeline. Why?" Eve met his eyes. Because I believed a rock slide would be more effective than a direct strike. It would block their approach permanently rather than just scattering them temporarily. That's a tactical judgment. You're ISR, not operations. I'm a commissioned officer, sir. Making tactical judgments is part of my job. Within your lane, the major said. You stepped way outside your lane. I stepped outside my lane to save lives, sir. I'd do it again. The room went quiet. Pearson studied her face, and Eve saw something in his expression shift. Calculation, maybe, or recognition. This is the problem, Pearson said finally. What you did was technically illegal. It was also morally necessary. Those two facts are in conflict, and I have to decide which one matters more. He closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen. I'm recommending you for a letter of reprimand for failure to follow orders. That's going in your permanent record. It'll probably kill your chances for promotion. Eve's stomach dropped, but Pearson wasn't finished. I'm also recommending you for a Bronze Star for heroic action in defense of civilian population. That's also going in your record. He leaned forward. Lieutenant, you're going to be a cautionary tale. Some officers will point to you as an example of everything wrong with the modern military. Junior officers who think they know better than their chain of command. Others will point to you as an example of moral courage under pressure. Which one are you going to be, sir? Pearson smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm going to be the one who has to explain to my superiors why I'm simultaneously punishing and rewarding the same officer for the same action. And I'm going to tell them the truth, that war is complicated, that rules don't always fit reality, and that sometimes we need soldiers who are willing to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. He stood. The other officers stood with him. You're dismissed, Lieutenant. Get some sleep. And Harper? He paused at the door. Don't make a habit of this. Next time, try to save the world within the chain of command. It's less paperwork. They left. Eve sat alone in the conference room, staring at the table, trying to process what had just happened. Letter of reprimand. Bronze Star. Her career was simultaneously over and validated. She should feel something, relief maybe, or anger at the contradictions. But all she felt was tired. Sam was waiting outside the building. How'd it go? They're reprimanding me and giving me a medal. Sounds about right. He fell into step beside her. Where are you headed? My quarters. Sleep. Good. You've earned it. They walked in silence for a minute. Then Sam said, You know, I've been thinking about what I said earlier. About you learning that the chain of command can fail. Yeah? I was wrong. You already knew that. That's why you acted. He stopped walking, turned to face her. What you learned today is that you can live with the consequences. That's the harder lesson. Eve looked at him, this 62-year-old man who'd seen too much and still showed up every day to try to make a difference. How do you do it? She asked. How do you keep going when you know the system is broken? You remember the people you saved. You focus on that. And you accept that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. He smiled. The system saved 247 lives today. It just needed you to drag it kicking and screaming to do the right thing. Eve wanted to believe him, wanted to think that one good day could balance out all the bureaucracy and moral compromise and institutional failure. Maybe it could, maybe it couldn't. But the woman in the blue headscarf was alive. The child was alive. 245 others were alive. That had to count for something. Get some sleep, Lieutenant, Sam said. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. He walked away, leaving Eve standing in the sun, thinking about rules and people and the impossibly complicated space between them. She went to her quarters, lay down on her cot, closed her eyes, and for the first time in 8 hours, she slept. Eve slept for 4 hours and woke to her phone buzzing. A message from Morris. Brigade wants full after-action report. Due COB today. Also, you've got interview requests from Stars and Stripes and Army Times. I'm holding them off for now, but you should probably decide how you want to handle this. She stared at the ceiling. Interview requests, of course. The story was going to get out. Probably already had. Junior officers saved civilians by disobeying orders. It was the kind of story that played well in headlines and poorly in courtrooms. She got up, showered, put on a clean uniform. The face in the mirror looked the same as it had yesterday. She'd expected something different, some visible mark of what she'd done. But no, same brown eyes, same regulation haircut, same lieutenant's bars. The only difference was invisible, something inside her that had bent but not broken. She grabbed her laptop and headed to the operations center. The after-action report wouldn't write itself. The ops floor was quieter during day shift. Different crew, different missions. A few analysts glanced up as she entered, then quickly looked away. Word had spread, apparently. Eve settled at an empty workstation and pulled up the report template. After Action Report, Operation Al-Mirha, Civilian Protection. She stared at the blank page for a long moment, then started typing. At 0200 hours, ISR assets detected enemy communications indicating imminent mass execution of civilian population in Al-Mirha Valley. The words came easier than she'd expected. Facts, timeline, decision points. She wrote it all down, clinical and precise, the way she'd been trained. Every regulation she'd violated, she cited. Every authorization she'd bypassed, she documented. This wasn't a defense, it was a confession. But it was an honest confession. She was 3 pages in when Sam appeared with coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting the cup down. "Thanks." She took a sip. Still better than Ops Center diesel. "Where'd you get the good stuff?" "I have my sources." He glanced at her screen. "How's the report coming?" "I'm documenting all the ways I violated military law. It's going great." "You're not going to try to justify it?" "I am justifying it, by laying out exactly what happened and why I made each decision. If they want to court-martial me after reading this, that's their choice." Sam nodded slowly. "You know, most officers would spend this report trying to cover their ass, find loopholes, cite obscure regulations, make it someone else's fault. I'm not most officers." "No, you're not." He pulled up a chair. "Listen, I've been talking to some people, contractors mostly, but also a few active duty guys I still know. The word on you is spreading fast. That's what I'm afraid of." "Don't be. It's good word. People are calling you the Reaper Lieutenant, the officer who stopped a massacre with a drone and a death wish." Eve grimaced. "That's not a compliment." "It's better than a compliment. It's a legend, and legends have power." He leaned closer. "Here's what you need to understand. The brass can reprimand you, medal you, court-martial you, whatever they want, but they can't control the story. And the story right now is that a junior officer did what the chain of command couldn't. That's dangerous for them." "Dangerous how?" "Because it makes people ask questions. If one lieutenant can make the right call when colonels and generals can't, what does that say about the system? What does it say about the chain of command?" Sam smiled. "They're going to have to be very careful with you, Eve. Too harsh and they look vindictive. Too soft and they look weak. You've got leverage. Use it." "I don't want leverage. I just want to do my job." "Your job just changed. Like it or not, you're political now." Eve saved her report and closed the laptop. "I didn't sign up for this. Nobody signs up for the hard calls. They just show up and we have to deal with them." Sam stood. "Finish your report, tell the truth, and then we'll figure out what comes next." He left. Eve opened the report again and kept writing. The interview request from Stars and Stripes came through official channels 3 hours later. Forwarded by Morris with a note, "Your call. PAO says they'd prefer you decline, but they can't order you to. Think carefully." Eve read the email twice. The reporter wanted to talk about the Al-Mirha incident and the moral challenges of modern warfare. Standard stuff, probably. A human interest piece about the lieutenant who saved civilians. She almost deleted it. Almost. But then she thought about the woman in the blue headscarf, about the fact that 247 people were alive, and nobody outside the chain of command knew how close they'd come to dying. She hit reply. I'll do the interview, but I want to talk about more than just Al-Mirha. I want to talk about the gaps in the system, the delays, the failures. She hesitated, then added, and I want it on record that I take full responsibility for my actions. Send. The response came back in 20 minutes. Absolutely. Interview tomorrow at 1400 hours. Thank you for your service. Eve closed her email and went back to the after-action report. She had 6 hours to finish it before COB. 6 hours to document everything that had happened and everything she'd learned. She wrote about the intercept, the thermal imagery, the mass graves. She wrote about Brigade's delay and her decision to act. She wrote about Sam's help and the Hellfire strikes and the rock slide that had saved hundreds of lives. And then, at the end, she wrote something that wasn't required by the template. Lessons learned. The current authorization process for time-sensitive operations is inadequate for situations requiring immediate action to prevent imminent civilian casualties. Recommend review of ROE to allow for commander's discretion in extreme circumstances. Additionally, recommend increased training for junior officers in independent decision-making under ambiguous conditions. Personal assessment. I violated multiple regulations in the execution of this operation. I do not dispute that fact. However, I maintain that my actions were morally and tactically justified given the circumstances. If faced with the same situation again, I would make the same decisions. She saved the file, attached it to an email to Morris, and hit send. Done. Eve stood, stretched, and walked out of the operations center. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, in a valley she'd never physically visited, 247 people were going home to their families. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Sarah. Mom saw a news article about a drone strike in the Middle East. Are you okay? Eve smiled and typed back. I'm fine. Tell Mom I'm safe. And tell her I did something good today. She didn't send details. Sarah wouldn't understand, and their mom would just worry. But it was true. She'd done something good. The question was whether that would be enough when the consequences caught up with her. The next morning, Eve woke to an email from Colonel Pearson. Report to my office at 0900. Bring your lawyer if you have one. She didn't have a lawyer, couldn't afford one on a lieutenant's salary, and the JAG office had made it clear they were conflicted. They couldn't represent her against the same command structure they work for. She showed up at Pearson's office alone. The colonel was waiting with the same JAG captain from before and a new face. A lieutenant colonel with intelligence insignia. Pearson gestured to a chair. Lieutenant Harper, this is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen from INSCOM. She's been reviewing your after-action report. Eve sat. Ma'am. Chen opened a tablet, scrolled through something. Your report is remarkably candid, Lieutenant. Most officers would try to soften this. I didn't see the point in lying, ma'am. I'm not criticizing. Honesty is refreshing. Chen set the tablet down. I'm here because your report raises some interesting questions about our current ISR protocols, specifically about decision-making authority for junior officers in the field. Ma'am, I don't think... Let me finish. Chen's voice was firm, but not unkind. You identified a critical gap, the delay between intelligence detection and operational authorization. That gap almost cost 247 lives. Your solution was to bypass the system. That's not sustainable. I know, ma'am. I said in my report, your report recommends changing the ROE. That's above your pay grade. Chen leaned forward. But it's not above mine. I'm putting together a working group to review ISR authorization protocols. I want you on it. Eve blinked. Ma'am? You have first-hand experience with the problem. You've demonstrated the ability to make hard calls under pressure. And frankly, you're the only officer I know who's willing to tell the truth, even when it costs them. Chen smiled slightly. Consider it punishment and reward, like everything else about this situation. Pearson spoke up. The working group will run parallel to your normal duties. You'll still be assigned to FOB Sentinel, still flying ISR missions. But 2 days a month, you'll come to INSCOM headquarters and help us figure out how to prevent the next Almira. Eve looked between them. Are you serious? Completely, Chen said. The alternative is we bury your report, reprimand you quietly, and hope the problem doesn't come up again. But I think we both know it will. So we can either learn from what happened, or we can pretend it didn't. Eve struggled for words. I'll do it. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. This is going to be hard work, and you'll make enemies. Every officer who wants the system to stay the same is going to see you as a threat. Chen stood. But if you can handle firing a Hellfire without authorization, you can probably handle some bureaucratic resistance. The meeting ended. Eve walked out in a daze. She'd expected punishment, maybe even prison. Instead, she was being asked to help fix the system she'd broken. Sam was waiting outside the building. How'd it go? He asked. They want me to join a working group, help reform ISR protocols. Huh, Sam grinned. So they're going to use you to fix the thing you broke. That's actually smart. Is it? Or are they just covering their asses by making it look like they're doing something? Maybe both. Does it matter? Eve thought about it. I guess not. If something good comes out of this, I don't care why they're doing it. There's the pragmatist I know. Sam started walking, and Eve fell into step beside him. You know what this means, right? You're not going to jail. You're not even getting kicked out. You're getting a second chance. Third chance if you count the Bronze Star. Fair point. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Sam said, What are you going to do with it? The second chance? Yeah. Eve looked out at the desert, at the base where she'd spent the last 7 months watching the world through a camera. I'm going to make sure it meant something. All of it. The violations, the risk, the cost. She looked at Sam. I'm going to make sure those 247 people didn't almost die for nothing. Good answer. Sam stopped walking. I'm proud of you, you know. You did something most people don't have the guts to do. You chose people over rules. I chose both. I just prioritized differently. That's what I mean, he smiled. You're going to be a hell of an officer, Lieutenant, assuming they don't court-martial you first. That's still on the table, isn't it? Probably, but I wouldn't worry too much. You've got friends now, people who believe in what you did. He squeezed her shoulder. And you've got video proof that you were right. That counts for a lot. Eve hoped he was right, but she'd learned enough in the past 48 hours to know that being right didn't always matter. Still, it was a start. The Stars and Stripes interview happened in a beige conference room that smelled like stale coffee and printed paper. The reporter was a woman named Jessica Ramos, mid-30s, notebook and recorder on the table between them. Lieutenant Harper, thank you for agreeing to this. Call me Eve. Ramos clicked the recorder on. Let's start with the basics. Walk me through what happened on the morning of the Al Mirha incident. Eve had rehearsed this in her head a dozen times. She told it straight. The intercept, the imagery, the delay from brigade, the decision to fire. She didn't embellish, didn't make herself into a hero, just facts. Ramos took notes, occasionally glancing up. You fired 2 Hellfire missiles without authorization. That's a significant violation of protocol. It is. Do you regret it? Eve met her eyes. I regret that I had to make that choice. I don't regret the choice I made. Even though it might cost you your career, 247 people are alive. My career is a small price to pay for that. Ramos set down her pen. Off the record for a second, you know this is going to make you famous, right? Or infamous, depending on who you ask. I didn't do it for fame. I know, that's what makes it a good story. Ramos clicked the recorder back on. Let's talk about the system. Your after-action report mentions gaps in the authorization process. Can you elaborate? Eve could. She talked about the delays, the risk-averse culture, the way bureaucracy could turn hours into days while people died. She talked about the need for junior officers to have more authority in time-sensitive situations. But wouldn't that lead to more mistakes? Ramos asked. More unauthorized strikes? More civilian casualties? Maybe. Or maybe it would lead to faster decisions when they matter most. Eve leaned forward. The current system assumes that higher command always has better information. But sometimes the person on the ground, or in my case, the person watching the screen, has the clearest picture. We need to trust that. And if that trust is abused, then you hold people accountable. But you don't let the fear of abuse prevent you from empowering people to do the right thing. Ramos smiled. That's a good quote. Mind if I use it? It's why I'm here. The interview lasted another hour. They talked about Sam, about the civilians, about what Eve hoped would change. Ramos asked good questions, the kind that made Eve think about her answers. When it was over, Ramos packed up her recorder. This is going to be front page, you know, probably picked up by civilian outlets too. I figured. You ready for that? For people to have opinions about you? Eve thought about the woman in the blue headscarf, about the child in her arms. I'm ready for whatever comes. Ramos left. Eve sat alone in the conference room and wondered if that was true. The article ran 3 days later, front page of Stars and Stripes above the fold. The Reaper Lieutenant, junior officer saves hundreds by breaking the rules. Eve read it in her quarters, alone, while the desert wind howled outside. Ramos had been fair. She'd included Eve's perspective, but also quotes from unnamed officers who called her actions reckless and dangerous precedent. The comments section was already full of arguments. Some called her a hero, some called her a traitor to the chain of command. Most were somewhere in between. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mom. Saw the article. Are you okay? Please call when you can. Eve called. Her mom answered on the second ring. Evelyn, oh my God, I've been so worried. I'm fine, Mom, I promise. The article said you could be court-martialed. That's possible, but it's not guaranteed. Eve walked to her window, looked out at the base. I did what I thought was right. Whatever happens next, I can live with it. Her mom was quiet for a long moment. Your father would be proud, you know. He always said the hardest thing about being a soldier was knowing when to follow orders and when to follow your conscience. Eve's throat tightened. Her dad had died when she was 16, a training accident, sudden and senseless. He'd been Army too, a sergeant who'd believed in duty and honor and doing the right thing even when it was hard. I wish he was here, Eve said quietly. Me too, honey. Me too. Her mom's voice was soft. But I think he'd tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You did good. You saved lives. And no matter what happens with the court-martial or the career or any of it, you did good. They talked for another 20 minutes about home and Sarah and anything except the Army. When Eve hung up, she felt lighter somehow, like someone had taken a weight off her shoulders, even if just for a moment. Sam knocked on her door an hour later. Saw the article, he said. You're famous. I'm notorious. There's a difference. Tomato, tomato. He held up a bottle. Brought whiskey. Figured you could use it. They sat on her steps and passed the bottle back and forth, watching the sun set over the desert. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Sam said, You know what the worst part of all this is going to be? The court-martial? Nah, the people who pretend they would have done the same thing. The armchair warriors who'll tell you they would have fired that missile without hesitation. He took a drink. They'll treat you like you did something easy, like it wasn't the hardest decision of your life. It was, Eve said quietly. I thought I was going to throw up when I pressed that button. I know. That's how I know you made the right call. If it had been easy, you'd be a sociopath. But it wasn't easy. It cost you something. Sam looked at her. That cost is what makes it matter. Eve took the bottle, drank, felt the burn in her throat. You ever think about the people you didn't save? The ones you could have helped if you'd just been a little faster, a little smarter? Every day. How do you deal with it? I remember the ones I did save. I focus on that. And I accept that I'm human. I can't save everyone, no matter how hard I try. He took the bottle back. You saved 247 people, Eve. That's 247 more than most people will save in their entire lives. You get to be proud of that. Even if I lose everything, especially if you lose everything, because that means you didn't do it for yourself. You did it because it was right. They finished the bottle as the stars came out. Eventually Sam left, and Eve went inside, lay down on her cot, and stared at the ceiling. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if she'd be court-martialed or promoted or quietly shuffled to some desk job where she couldn't cause trouble. But she knew one thing, she'd do it again. Every time, no matter the cost. That had to be enough. The summons came a week later. Official letterhead, formal language. Lieutenant Evelyn Harper is hereby ordered to appear before an Article 32 hearing to determine whether charges should be preferred regarding violations of military law during Operation Al-Mirha civilian protection. Eve read it 3 times. Article 32, that was the preliminary step before a court-martial. They were actually doing it. She called the JAG office, got a lawyer assigned, Captain Marcus Webb, a tired-looking man with too many cases and not enough time. They met in his cramped office at Camp Stryker. I'm not going to lie to you, Lieutenant. This is bad. Webb spread the file across his desk. 2 counts of unauthorized use of deadly force, 1 count of disobeying a direct order, 1 count of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. He looked up. They're throwing the book at you. Can we win? Depends on what you mean by win. Can we avoid a court-martial? Maybe. Can we avoid punishment entirely? No. Webb tapped the file. The evidence is overwhelming. You fired those missiles without authorization. That's indisputable. I fired to save lives. I know, and that's our defense. Necessity. Imminent harm to civilians. No time for proper authorization. Reasonable belief that action was required. He leaned back. But it's a risky defense, because if the board decides you were wrong, if they think you overreacted or misinterpreted the intelligence, then you're looking at 5 to 10 years in Leavenworth. Eve's stomach dropped. 5 to 10 years. At minimum. Could be more if they want to make an example. Webb studied her face. Are you sure you want to fight this? Because they've offered a deal, plead guilty to conduct unbecoming, accept a general discharge, no prison time. You walk away, live your life. And the people I saved? They don't factor into the plea bargain. This is about you and your career. Eve stood, walked to the window. Outside, soldiers moved between buildings, going about their duties. The machinery of the military, grinding on, indifferent to individual struggles. If I take the plea, she said slowly, what happens to the working group? The reforms Colonel Chen wanted? Probably nothing. Without you pushing it, it'll die in committee. So I stay silent, accept punishment, and nothing changes. And the next time this happens, the next junior officer might not be as lucky. Yeah, Webb sighed. Look, I'm supposed to advise you to take the plea. It's the smart move. But I've read your after-action report. I know why you did what you did. He paused. If you want to fight, I'll fight with you. Just know what you're risking. Eve turned back to him. I'm risking my freedom for the chance that something might change, that the system might get better. Long odds. Better than no odds at all. She sat down. I'm not taking the plea. We go to the hearing. Webb nodded slowly. All right, then we need to prepare. The hearing is in 3 weeks. We need witnesses, evidence, character references. Sam Crowley, he was with me, he can testify. The contractor? They'll argue he's biased. He's also a 30-year veteran with first-hand knowledge of what happened. His testimony matters. Okay, who else? Eve thought. Captain Morris. He was shift commander. He saw the delays from brigade. Will he testify? I don't know, but I can ask. They spent the next 2 hours building a defense strategy. It was thin, mostly relying on the argument that Eve had acted in good faith to prevent an atrocity. Not a strong legal defense, but it was what they had. When Eve left Webb's office, the sun was setting. She walked back to Fob's Sentinel alone, thinking about prison, about the woman in the blue headscarf, about whether doing the right thing was worth losing everything. She still didn't have an answer. The Article 32 hearing was held in a windowless room at Camp Stryker. A long table for the investigating officer, a full-bird colonel named Davidson, tables for prosecution and defense, chairs for witnesses. Eve sat beside Webb, hands folded, trying to look calm. Across from them, the prosecuting attorney, a major named Patterson, was arranging papers with mechanical precision. Colonel Davidson called the hearing to order. We're here to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to refer charges against Lieutenant Evelyn Harper to a general court-martial. Major Patterson, you may proceed. Patterson stood. Thank you, sir. The government will show that Lieutenant Harper, on the morning of the 11th of January, willfully and knowingly violated military regulations by launching 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles without proper authorization, in direct contravention of orders from her chain of command. He went through the evidence methodically. Mission logs showing Eve's launch authorization bypass. Radio transcripts showing Morris's order to stand down. Testimony from brigade officers about proper procedure. It was damning. Even Eve had to admit that. Then Patterson called his key witness, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Grimes, the brigade operations officer who delayed the authorization. Grimes took the stand looking crisp and professional. Patterson walked him through the timeline. Colonel, when you received the initial intelligence about Almirha, what was your assessment? That it required further analysis. Single-source intelligence can be unreliable, especially intercepts. We needed corroboration before authorizing kinetic action. How long would proper corroboration have taken? Standard timeline is 4 to 6 hours for thorough analysis. And in your professional opinion, was Lieutenant Harper's decision to fire without that analysis justified? Absolutely not. She acted on incomplete information and potentially put civilian lives at greater risk. Eve's jaw tightened. Webb put a hand on her arm. Stay calm. Patterson smiled. No further questions. Webb stood for cross-examination. Colonel Grimes, you said proper analysis takes 4 to 6 hours. The intercepted communications indicated the executions would begin in 6 hours. So even with proper procedure, authorization would have come right at the deadline. That's possible, yes. And if the intelligence was accurate, which it was, then proper procedure would have resulted in those civilians dying while we analyzed. That's speculation. Is it? Let me ask directly. Did your analysis, when it was finally completed, confirm Lieutenant Harper's assessment? Grimes shifted. The analysis was consistent with her interpretation, yes. So she was right. Being right doesn't justify. Answer the question, Colonel. Was Lieutenant Harper's assessment of the threat accurate? A pause. Yes. And if she had waited for your authorization, would those civilians be alive? We can't know. Colonel, based on the timeline, if Lieutenant Harper had followed procedure and waited for your authorization, would there have been time to prevent the executions? Grimes's jaw tightened. Probably not. So her choice was to follow procedure and let people die, or break procedure and save them. That's an oversimplification. Is it? Webb let the question hang. No further questions. The prosecution called 2 more witnesses, both officers who talked about the importance of discipline and chain of command. Then it was the defense's turn. Webb called Sam first. Sam took the stand with the easy confidence of someone who'd testified before. Webb walked him through his background: 30 years in special forces, multiple combat deployments, current contractor status. Mr. Crowley, you were present during the Almirha incident. In your professional opinion, was Lieutenant Harper's decision justified? Absolutely. I've been in situations like this before, where you have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. Harper made the right call. The prosecution argues she acted on incomplete information. The prosecution wasn't watching 247 people about to be executed. We were. And sometimes you don't have the luxury of complete information. You have to act on what you know. Sam looked directly at Colonel Davidson. If we'd waited for perfect intelligence, those people would be dead. That's not speculation. That's fact. Webb nodded. No further questions. Patterson stood for cross. Mr. Crowley, you're a civilian contractor. You don't have the same obligations to military discipline that Lieutenant Harper does. True. So when you advised her to fire that missile, you weren't risking anything. She was. Sam's expression hardened. I was risking my conscience, my ability to sleep at night. That might not matter to you, Major, but it matters to me. But you didn't face court-martial. No, I faced something worse. I faced the memory of every person I didn't save because I was too scared to break the rules. Sam leaned forward. Harper had the guts to do what needed to be done. You want to punish her for that? Fine. But don't pretend it's about discipline. It's about you being scared of junior officers who think for themselves. Patterson's face flushed. I'm done with this witness. Webb called Captain Morris next. Morris testified reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable, but he confirmed the timeline, confirmed the delays from brigade, confirmed that Eve had acted in good faith. On cross-examination, Patterson got him to admit that Eve had violated orders. But the damage was done. The picture was clear. The chain of command had failed, and Eve had stepped into the gap. Finally, Webb called Eve herself. Eve took the stand feeling like she was walking to her own execution. Webb guided her through the timeline, the intercept, the imagery, the decision to fire. She answered truthfully, didn't try to hide anything. Then Patterson stood for cross-examination. Lieutenant Harper, you're aware that unauthorized use of deadly force is a serious crime under the UCMJ? Yes, sir. And you knew this when you fired those missiles? Yes, sir. So you knowingly and willfully violated military law. Eve met his eyes. I knowingly and willfully saved 247 lives. That's not what I asked. It's the only answer that matters. Patterson's expression hardened. Lieutenant, do you believe you have the right to disobey orders whenever you disagree with them? No, sir. Then what makes this case different? Because this wasn't about disagreement. It was about necessity. The chain of command had failed. People were about to die. I had the means to stop it. I acted. And if every junior officer took that attitude, if everyone decided they could override their superiors whenever they felt it was necessary, then maybe the chain of command would work harder to make good decisions in the first place. The room went silent. Patterson stared at her, and Eve realized she just made his case for him. Insubordination, disrespect, everything he needed to destroy her. But she didn't care. It was the truth. Patterson recovered. No further questions. Webb stood. Redirect, Your Honor. Lieutenant Harper, in your professional judgment, if you had followed orders and waited for authorization, what would have happened? 247 people would have been executed. You're certain of this? As certain as I can be about anything. The intelligence was clear. The timeline was clear. The threat was real. And knowing what you know now, knowing you're facing court-martial, possibly prison, would you make the same decision? Eve didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Every time. Webb nodded. No further questions. Colonel Davidson called a recess. The lawyers argued in hushed tones. Eve sat at the defense table, hands shaking, wondering if she'd just sealed her fate. After 30 minutes, Davidson came back. I've reviewed the evidence and heard the testimony. This is a difficult case. Lieutenant Harper clearly violated regulations, but her motivations appear to have been genuine concern for civilian lives. He paused. However, motivation doesn't erase the violation. The question before me is whether there's sufficient evidence to proceed to court-martial. Eve held her breath. After careful consideration, I find that there is sufficient evidence. I'm recommending that charges be referred to a general court-martial. Davidson looked at Eve. Lieutenant, you'll have the opportunity to present your full defense at that proceeding. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. Eve felt the world tilt. Webb leaned over. This isn't over. We can still fight at the court-martial. But Eve barely heard him. She was going to trial. She was going to fight for her freedom in front of a military jury. And there was a very real chance she was going to lose. Sam caught her in the hallway outside. Hey, you okay? I'm going to court-martial. Yeah, but you're not going to prison. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Because I'm going to call in every favor I have. I'm going to talk to every reporter who'll listen. I'm going to make sure that if they send you to Leavenworth, the whole world knows what you did and why. He grabbed her shoulders. You're not alone in this, Eve. You've got people fighting for you. Eve wanted to believe him. But belief was hard when you were staring down the barrel of a court-martial. The court-martial was set for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Eve was placed on administrative duty. No flying, no operations, just paperwork and waiting. It was torture. She spent her days in a borrowed office, reviewing reports that didn't matter, and her nights in her quarters, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she'd ever fly again. Sam visited every few days, bringing coffee and conversation. Morris checked in occasionally, awkward and sympathetic. Colonel Chen sent a message. Hang in there. The working group is moving forward regardless of the outcome. It helped. Not much, but a little. The article in Stars and Stripes had spawned a dozen follow-ups. Civilian outlets picked up the story. Cable news ran segments. Eve became a symbol, for some, of moral courage, for others of dangerous insubordination. She tried not to read the coverage, mostly failed. Then 3 weeks before the court-martial, something changed. Eve got a call from Webb. Turn on the news, CNN, now. She found a TV in the rec room, switched to CNN. The screen showed a press conference, a podium with multiple microphones, and behind it a woman in a blue headscarf. Eve's breath stopped. The woman spoke in Arabic, with English subtitles running below. My name is Amira Hassan. I am one of the people saved by the American soldier. I want the world to know what she did for us. The camera pulled back. Behind Amira were others, men, women, children, all survivors of Al-Mirha. They were going to kill us, Amira continued. We knew this. We had accepted it. We prayed for mercy. And then the explosions came, and our captors fled, and we lived. She looked directly at the camera. The American soldier, Lieutenant Harper, she saved us when her own government would not. For this, we are grateful. For this, we speak now. One by one, the survivors told their stories. The fear, the certainty of death, the miracle of salvation. The last to speak was a child, maybe 8 years old, who held up a drawing. It showed a drone in the sky and people on the ground, and above it, written in careful English, "Thank you, Lieutenant Harper." The press conference ended. The news anchors came back on, discussing the implications. But Eve wasn't listening. She was crying, quietly, helplessly, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd done and what it had meant. Her phone rang. Webb. Did you see it? Yeah, Eve's voice cracked. Yeah, I saw it. This changes everything. The prosecution's case is that you acted recklessly. But now we have the actual people you saved testifying that you acted heroically. Webb sounded energized. I'm filing a motion to include their testimony in the trial. The jury needs to see this. Will the judge allow it? He'd better, because if he doesn't, the public outcry is going to be massive. Webb paused. Eve, I think we can win this. I actually think we can win. Eve wiped her eyes. Even if we don't, even if I go to prison, at least they know, the people I saved, at least they know. You're not going to prison, not now, not after this. Eve wanted to believe him. And for the first time since the Article 32 hearing, she actually did. The court-martial began on a Tuesday morning in October. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, officers, supporters, protesters. Outside, a small crowd held signs, "Free Lieutenant Harper," and "Justice for Moral Courage." Eve sat at the defense table in her dress uniform, medals polished, hands steady. Webb sat beside her, case files organized, ready for battle. The judge, Colonel Amanda Reeves, called the court to order. The jury filed in, 5 officers ranging from captain to colonel. Their faces were neutral, unreadable. The prosecution laid out its case. Major Patterson was efficient, methodical, damning. He showed the logs, played the recordings, demonstrated beyond any doubt that Eve had violated regulations. The question before you, Patterson told the jury, is not whether Lieutenant Harper had good intentions. The question is whether good intentions justify violating the law. And the answer, under military justice, is no. Then it was Webb's turn. He called witness after witness. Sam testified about the necessity of the decision. Morris testified about the failures of the chain of command. An ISR expert testified that Eve's intelligence assessment was not only accurate, but exemplary. And then Webb played the video from the press conference. The survivor's testimony. Amira Hassan's words. She saved us when her own government would not. The courtroom was silent as the video ended. Webb turned to the jury. Major Patterson is right about one thing. This case is about good intentions versus the law. But he's wrong about the answer. Because sometimes, in extraordinary circumstances, following the law means letting people die. And Lieutenant Harper wasn't willing to do that. He walked to the evidence table, picked up a photo, the thermal image of Al-Mirha Square, 247 heat signatures clustered together. These people were going to die, not might die, were going to die. The intelligence was clear, the threat was imminent, and the chain of command had failed to act. He set the photo down. Lieutenant Harper had a choice: follow orders and watch a massacre, or break orders and prevent it. Webb paused, let it sink in. She chose to save lives, and for that choice the government wants to send her to prison. He looked at each juror in turn. I'm asking you to choose differently. I'm asking you to recognize that courage sometimes means breaking the rules, that moral integrity sometimes requires disobedience, that being a good soldier sometimes means being a good human being first. He sat down. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Reeves looked at the jury. You'll now deliberate. Take all the time you need. The jury filed out. Eve sat motionless, waiting. The deliberation took 4 hours. When the jury returned, their faces were still neutral. The foreman, a colonel, stood. On the charge of unauthorized use of deadly force, we find the defendant not guilty. Eve's breath caught. On the charge of disobeying a direct order, we find the defendant not guilty. Webb grabbed her hand, squeezed. On the charge of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Cheers, applause, protests. Judge Reeves banged her gavel, called for order, but the noise continued. Eve sat frozen, unable to process it. Not guilty. On all charges. She was free. Sam was there suddenly, pulling her into a hug. Told you you weren't going to prison. Webb was shaking her hand, grinning. You did it. We did it. Eve looked at the jury, at the faces that had just given her back her life. Some were smiling. Some looked troubled. All looked like they'd made a hard decision and hoped it was the right one. Judge Reeves restored order. Lieutenant Harper, you are acquitted of all charges. However, I want to make something clear. She looked directly at Eve. What you did was necessary in this specific circumstance. That does not make it a precedent. The chain of command exists for good reason. You were lucky, your judgment was sound, your actions were justified, and the outcome was positive. But that won't always be the case. I understand, Your Honor. I hope you do, because the next junior officer who tries this might not be as fortunate. Reeves paused. That said, you showed remarkable courage and moral clarity in an impossible situation. The military needs more officers like you. Don't let this experience destroy that. She banged the gavel one final time. Court is adjourned. Eve walked out of the courtroom a free woman. Outside, the crowd was chanting her name. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. She found a quiet corner, pulled out her phone, called her mom. I'm okay, she said when her mom answered. It's over. I'm okay. Her mom was crying. Oh, thank God. Thank God. They talked for 10 minutes, about everything and nothing. When Eve hung up, Sam was waiting. Hell of a day, he said. Hell of a 6 months. Worth it? Eve thought about Amira Hassan, about the child's drawing, about 247 people who were alive because she'd made a hard choice. Yeah, she said, worth it. 6 months later, Eve was back at FOB Sentinel, flying ISR missions. But things were different now. The working group had produced results, new protocols for time-sensitive operations, expanded authority for junior officers in specific circumstances, mandatory training on ethical decision-making under pressure. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. Eve had been promoted to captain. The bronze star sat on her dress uniform next to the letter of reprimand in her file. Contradictions, both permanent. She flew her missions, did her job, and tried not to think too hard about what had happened. But every time she brought up the Al Mirha Valley on her screen, she thought about it anyway. One day a package arrived, no return address, just a postmark from Turkey. Inside was a photograph. Amira Hassan and her family, including the child who'd drawn the picture, standing in front of a house, smiling. On the back, written in careful English, "We are home. We are safe. Because of you. Thank you for your courage. Amira." Eve pinned the photo to her wall, next to her duty roster and mission schedules, a reminder of why she'd done it, why she'd do it again if she had to. Sam found her staring at it one afternoon. That the family from Al Mirha? Yeah. Good people. Yeah. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Sam said, "You know what the hardest part of this job is?" "What?" "Remembering that every decision you make affects real people. Not pixels on a screen. Not intelligence targets. Real people with real lives." He nodded at the photo. "You never forgot that. That's why you're going to be a hell of a leader someday." Eve looked at the photo, at Amira's smile, at the child's happiness, at the life that continued because she'd chosen courage over compliance. "I hope so," she said quietly. "I know so." Sam squeezed her shoulder. "Now come on, we've got a briefing in 10 minutes. The war doesn't stop because you had a revelation." They left together. Behind them, the photograph remained, a small piece of evidence that sometimes doing the right thing was worth any price. Even if the world never knew, even if it cost everything, even if you had to break every rule to do it. Because in the end, the rules existed to protect people. And when they failed at that, someone had to step into the gap. Lieutenant, now Captain, Evelyn Harper had stepped into that gap. And she'd do it again. Every time, no matter what.